And we are back live, guys. Sorry about those technical difficulties. Getting a little wild out here in California. Joey knows better than anyone else, but we are back here after the technical difficulties. And I believe we had a question from Trevor about the Big Ten football season.
All right. So my question is, we all know where the current situation is with the Big Ten of a potential fall season, maybe in late November around Thanksgiving, maybe early October, depending where things are. But what are the current updates that the Big Ten has released, as well as the chance that there could be a potential fall season if they decide to get things together in time?
Well, if you're looking for answers from the Big Ten right now, there are very few, to be quite frank. The Big Ten, it's been unusual to watch them over the last month since they canceled the football season, because there have been very few, I think, indications on what the conference exactly plans to do next. They said they were postponing the season, and they said they would look to reschedule in the spring. And the only really clues, I guess, or information we have to go off is what some of the athletic directors have been able to confirm and state publicly. Gene Smith, Ohio State's athletic director, has mentioned one possibility that they're looking at as a start time around Thanksgiving. Some of the other plans put forth by some of the coaches involve a start around January, but there's been interest from people about seeing if they could possibly start later in October. There just isn't a lot of firm details from the Big Ten Conference or Kevin Warren, the commissioner. Really what we have to go off is what the ADs have said, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of talk about a season. Going off the dates that have been suggested, it seems like the most common ones that have been discussed around Thanksgiving, New Year's Day. So nobody's really been advocating or publicly advocating a particularly strong stance for October. Iowa's athletic director Gary Barta last week mentioned that it would take a miracle for them to play in October. So I think maybe as around late November you might start to see a potential season start. And I think one reason why late November could happen is, one, I think the ability to get rapid testing for teams would be there, and two, students aren't going to be on campuses starting in late November. The general student body population is going to leave campus, or the fall semester is going to end at a lot of places around Thanksgiving. So if you start around that time, the first few weeks of your season would be in a bubble-like atmosphere for teams, where basically players would be the main ones on a college campus. So that would maybe be another boost to the conference. So it seems like that's where things are at. It seems like if you were to rank the scenarios as most likely, it seems like late fall, early winter would be the most likely point based on what's been said publicly.
All right. I agree with a lot of stuff that you said. Like, it's very hard to pinpoint what the season could look like. Obviously, it's going to boil down to what the other Power 5 conferences end up going through. If they end up testing positive, it may just shut down the entire Big Ten season altogether. But we have to literally wait and see what ends up happening this, I guess, few months of September and then beginning of October to see what that unfolds.
All right, let's move on to Ryan.
Yeah, my question is simply, have you heard anything like around Ohio State football about like the general feeling towards the Big Ten and just the lack of transparency, communication, and just really overall plan? Like you said, they said they're going to delay it to the spring, but haven't like released like a date or like a set plan. Really just has like nothing going forward. Like, what's the like general feeling in the building about how, or like what's the feeling in terms of this? Are they angry, just more confused?
They're not happy, to say the least, and they're pretty angry with the Big Ten. And I think most people are reasonable. They could understand why a season is being called off. Even there are people who are not going to be happy with the decision in any case, because they wanted a chance to at least have a season. They wanted a chance to test their protocols and see if they work and if they could play a season without a cluster of cases on their roster, and they weren't going to be happy unless given that opportunity. But if that never materialized, they never had a chance to go through a season. I think the real frustration from Ohio State's program is that, okay, you have taken away our preferred option and our preferred path forward, but what is the alternative? What are you now presenting to us as the roadmap moving forward? And for coaches, for players, for the parents of players, there is no roadmap. Ohio State's able to do 12 hours a week of work between coaches and players. That includes 5 hours of practice, but they don't know what they're practicing for, when they would be able to take the field. So they're in this limbo stage. And I think that's hard for a lot of players because really since March, their lives have been in limbo and they've been told to sacrifice for the chance to have a fall season. Then that was removed as a possibility. And then there's discussion about this plan or that plan or some far-fledged plan for a winter or spring season. And I think it's weighing on them and it's frustrating for them not to know anything concrete. Even if there was a plan that was written in pencil, that would be better than what they have now because right now there's nothing written in anything.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. If I was a player, I would, what would upset me the most is the fact that, as you said, they're just in limbo. Like there's no set plan. It'd be one thing if they like delayed the fall season, but then had concrete plans, like a start date and a schedule for the spring. But to not have that and to just say, or just to be told, hey, we're working on it. We promise there'll be a spring season. I can only imagine the frustration if I was a player or a coach or even like a family member of one of the players. But this sort of anger in the building leads me to my next question. In your personal opinion, do you believe there is like any chance whatsoever that after the events that have transpired, that Ohio State would consider leaving the Big Ten for another conference or going independent, like say Notre Dame or a BYU?
I don't really see that as a realistic option. One, because Ohio State is able to pool its resources with Michigan, with Penn State, with Wisconsin, Nebraska, really popular college football programs, Michigan State. They make more TV money than any conference in the country. The Big Ten gets they get almost $50 million a year in media rights distributions. Large chunk of that comes from the conference's TV deal. So if you leave the Big Ten, you have to then create a setup as an independent where you're going to make that much money, and that remains to be unseen whether they would or could or how that would transpire. Number two, I think you also have to consider all the Olympic sports that Ohio State has, soccer, volleyball, synchronized swimming, wrestling, tennis, all those sports. You would need to then set up a league for them or find a home for them to play conference games. It's one thing to arrange or do what Notre Dame does and schedule 12 regular season football games. I think Ohio State football can do that. What are you going to do about the women's ice hockey team or the men's wrestling team or the field hockey team? I think that's where it gets a lot more difficult for you if you want to be a school that offers those opportunities for your Olympic sports. And that is a big priority for Ohio State. They sponsor 36 varsity sports teams, which is more than any other major conference athletic department. Stanford used to sponsor 36 sports as well, but they announced in July that they were going to cut 11 sports. So Ohio State is, as one of the largest athletic departments, they are a school that likes to offer a lot of sports. And I think if they were to go independent, it would limit those opportunities, and that is important for its administration as well. It's not football drives the bus, and football predominates a lot of the fans' attention. But I think to the school, I think those other sports matter as well.
I would like to also piggyback off that question.
And just to clarify.
Okay.
Just to clarify, sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. So just to clarify, if this were to just be the football aspect, like if it was just Ohio State football that were to lead the Big Ten, would your answer still be the same in that they probably would not lead the Big Ten and that there's really just no chance they would?
Well, I think you can't totally detach football from as its own separate entity, because then I don't know exactly how the Big Ten would then allow Ohio State's other sports to be in the conference if football was going to detach itself. But even, I guess, as a theoretical exercise, I do think there are a lot of older Ohio State fans, boosters, who do care about the tradition. I mean, there are a lot of people, frankly, who don't like it when Ohio State plays night games. So, and because they're used to the 1970s and 80s when a majority of the time you played at noon on Saturday or early afternoon. So if you were to remove the Big Ten Conference, which Ohio State has been a member of since World War I think to a lot of people who do value that tradition, and those are boosters and fans who have input as well. I think the decision to leave the conference would be sad. And I think a lot of it is I know Ohio State's football program is, the coaches and players are upset with the Big Ten, but it's one thing to be upset with your conference partner. It's another thing to get a divorce, and I think that might be a little knee jerk.
Yeah. So speaking of spring and fall college football for the Big Ten, Joey, if we do have the Big Ten season to be postponed until spring as planned originally, what do you believe the chances are that Justin Fields would suit up and not forego that spring football season for the NFL draft?
I don't think very high. I wouldn't rule it out, though. I know everybody. I know the assumption is that he wouldn't play in the spring season, but I mean, you never know. Sometimes you see college quarterbacks make a surprise decision. Andrew Luck, I remember after his third year at Stanford, everybody thought he was going to be a sure bet to leave for the NFL after his third year in 2010. He came back in 2011. So sometimes people make decisions that surprise you, but I think the spring season does make it hard for somebody like Justin Fields, who has a great opportunity to go toward the top of the first round. Because if a spring season goes into March, the NFL Combine's in late February. Is Justin Fields going to be able to go to the Combine and really jockey for a position to be at the top of the draft? And if you are playing games in March, does that make it more complicated for him to go through private workouts? And does that make it more complicated for him to begin training camp in late July and compete for a starting quarterback job? Joe Burrow's going ahead with the Bengals and ready to go on day one, week one, early September. If you are playing games into the spring of 2021, I imagine that makes your rookie season in the NFL a lot more difficult. So that's going to be another consideration, something to weigh for a lot of these draft eligible guys. One thing the NFL could do that would help would be to, one, postpone the combine and one, postpone the draft. And I do think there's incentive for the NFL to do that, because if you're an NFL general manager or scout, you may like to watch some of these guys play their junior season. Shaun Wade was going to move to outside corner. Wouldn't you like to see more tape on him in a game? Justin Fields is going to start for a second season under Ohio State. I'm sure they would like to see more game film from him. So I think it will be interesting to watch if the NFL makes any accommodations for college football and the Big Ten.
Yeah, when I look at the spring season, I look at two big losers here. And, what immediately comes to mind is guys like Joe Burrow and Tyler Johnson in the Big Ten, and obviously Burrow in the SEC. They had such a great senior season that helped boost their draft stock. And now with, Big Ten football move to spring, you could have those types of breakout stars that don't get their opportunity to shine in their senior season. And even if they do happen to play that spring football season, it's going to be so taxing for them to go through a deep run like the Gophers or the LSU Tigers went through, and then to go into the NFL draft. So, Joey, I think when you mentioned postponing the draft and postponing the workouts and the scouting, it would definitely be really helpful to these college, soon-to-be NFL players.
Yeah, it's good you bring up Joe Burrow, because that would be just a fascinating series of alternative events. What happens if his 2018 season, his first season at LSU, was a year later and he never got to play his senior season because of this pandemic? That would have been huge. It would have been just such a drastic impact on his status as a pro prospect. He wasn't anywhere close to being the number one overall pick in the draft last year. After his junior season at LSU, which was his first year in the program, he completed 57.8% of his passes, 16-5 touchdown to interception ratio. Just such a drastic performance statistical line from his senior season when he completed 76% of his passes, and then arguably one of the best or most impressive seasons ever for a college quarterback, at least statistically, and just the overall moxie he showed in leading LSU to a national championship. I mean, you're talking about somebody who's maybe a mid-round pick rather than a first overall pick. So there are so many guys out there, I'm sure, who could have had a great 2020 season and is used as a springboard, and now they're not really going to get that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely unfortunate. Joe Burrow, by the way, would have been a 6th-round pick according to Pro Football Focus and a couple other sites in terms of the draft projections. But I want to go to Shri now, who has a question about some of the departures for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, thanks, Steven. So, like you said, if we do have a spring football season, I could definitely see contributors like Justin Fields, and you mentioned Shaun Wade sitting out, potentially looking to work out for the NFL rather than to play their final season at Ohio State. And, even if there's not a season, then we're not going to see those guys take the field. So who are some of the younger players to keep an eye on? Who are some of the guys that have been sticking out to you during training camp and such?
It's hard because we haven't really watched them in quite a while. The quarterback competition, if Justin Fields were to leave, would be fascinating to me, because the options that they have would be either to go with the experienced or the older, more seasoned person in the program, which would be Gunnar Hoke, who's a 5th-year guy, former grad transfer from Kentucky. And the other options would be true freshmen who just came into Ohio State in the spring and had all of a week of spring practice before the shutdown, and C.J. Stroud and Jack Miller, 2 former blue-chip quarterbacks. But I really liked what we saw to C.J. Stroud in spring practice. Had a really nice, clean, quick delivery, and he's got talent, and a spring season would be certainly he'd be thrust in there as a true freshman. But we've seen true freshmen perform well in college football lately. It's not out of the question that you could have a true freshman and play really well and succeed. And considering Ryan Day's background as a former quarterbacks coach and offensive coordinator, I'd be really interested to see if C.J. Stroud could win that quarterback job and play right away in the spring. I think certainly he could be successful.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually had a follow-up question to the potential season in November, right? You said that there could potentially be a season later on in November that goes through potentially early next year. So now that the college football playoff has come out and said, we're going to play as scheduled, do you see maybe some of these blue chip players sitting out, even if it is in November, or do you think that for the most part they will continue to play?
I think you could see guys still play. I think a November start makes it more likely that you could see draft eligible prospects play. I think it's a little bit like a sliding scale. The earlier you start, the more likely it is for somebody like Justin Fields or Shaun Wade to play. Because if you start in late November and a season were to go to late January, early February, you're talking about maybe a month delay for what would be the normal season for these guys. So from just a wear and tear perspective, I think there would be a decent chance of them playing. I think the other consideration, of course, is we've seen draft eligible players skip out on bowl games, or mostly lower tier bowl games, not your college football playoff. But we've even seen guys skip a New Year's Six bowl game. Denzel Ward skipped out in the Cotton Bowl for Ohio State back in 2017.
Yes.
And in a lot of ways, if they play a season in late November and they're not competing for a national title, that's really just one long exhibition series. So I think that's something that still makes it more likely for some of those guys to opt out. But at least you're not compounding it with one, you're messing with their timeline for their draft prep, and two, obviously there's less at stake or less to play for as far as the national championship race. You're only dealing with one of those issues with the November start.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Much more likely, in my opinion, as well. But I just wanted to see whether you think that, similar to the bowl games, that those players would sit out. But I kind of tend to agree with you. I don't see competitors like Justin Fields sitting out, regardless of whether we're competing for the national title or for potentially a Rose Bowl. So.
Yep. Let's move it to Ryan, who has a question about just how stacked this Ohio State team is.
Yes, speaking of the talent on Ohio State's roster, in your personal opinion, how many first-round draft picks do you see on this roster currently? And for this, let's assume like Justin Fields, Shaun Wade, like guys like that would leave early to go to the NFL draft.
I think you probably have at least two in Justin Fields and Shaun Wade. I think then you start with them. I think maybe then you look at some other guys on the roster who could be fringe first round picks, and maybe some late round guys. I would start with Chris Olave, who was impressive last year as a sophomore with his speed and ability to get open. I think he's somebody who is hurt by not having this season, because really 2019 was his breakout stretch. And normally you would ideally want to follow that up with a big junior season and go pro, but he still is talented enough or maybe he's somebody you could slide into the late first. Wyatt Davis would be somebody as well who's a really talented right guard. The thing that maybe makes it a little tough on him is sometimes offensive guards don't go as high in the draft as tackles might. Sometimes the interior offensive linemen don't get slotted as high. But I think those would be two guys who could, for Ohio State, potentially be picked very high as well in the late first.
Yeah, let's turn it over to Shri, who has a question about.
Do you see anyone on the defensive line? Oh, my apologies. I just wanted to quickly follow up. Do you see anyone on the defensive line that could be a surprise pick to maybe sneak into the first round with a good year, assuming they play football?
Tommy Togiai is probably, I'll give you two guys. Tommy Togiai, he's an interior defensive tackle. He's one guy that a lot of players in the team have referred to as being the strongest guy on the team. So I think if you're the strongest guy on the Ohio State football team, that certainly counts for something as far as your talent ceiling and your draft stock. The other guy is Tyreek Smith, defensive end, who's somebody who's been discussed as being the next pass rushing defensive end after we've seen the Bosa's at Ohio State and then followed up by Chase Young. Tyreek Smith has been viewed as the guy who's, at least from a talent base, somebody who should be next in line. The whole issue for a lot of these guys is Tommy Togiai, Tyreek Smith. These were guys you're banking on having a big junior season. They have potential, but they haven't had maybe the run of time on the field due to injuries or just where they're slotted in the rotation, because Ohio State's plenty deep at a lot of positions. So this is the year that maybe doesn't leave them with as many opportunities as they would normally get. But I think if you're picking the next two best draft prospects on the Ohio State defensive line, those would be the two guys I would circle.
Yep. Shout out to Noah tuning in from Ohio State, fellow Buckeye. He asked, "Are esports real sports?" Noah, we'll get into that one on the next segment, but we're going to keep it focused on Ohio State and USC football for this segment. But with that being said, I want to go to Shri because he had a question about the recent coaching change between Urban Meyer and Brian Day that happened last year.
Yeah, so I think you've covered Ohio State football for 2 years now, right?
My first year actually was in 2019, so I came in during spring ball, Ryan Day's first spring practice.
Gotcha. Okay. So, I mean, maybe this question may not be as relevant, but I was wondering, like, have you, from what you've seen and from what you've heard from maybe other reporters that report on Ohio State, um, what are some things in the program that like changed from, when Urban Meyer was there to when Ryan Day was there, and has Ryan Day kept things mostly consistent, or have there been some major changes in the way the program runs day to day?
I think the biggest change, because I was able to kind of cover that offseason of transition a little bit from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day, is I think Ryan Day has a little bit of a lighter touch than Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer was known for being a very intense, a very demanding coach, and I think Ryan Day is demanding in his own ways, but I think he's as a little more lighter, a little more, I think maybe less intense than Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer is really known for being his whole mantra was everything you did, every rep in the weight room, every meeting was a 4th and 1. Just, I think then you think of that imagery where it's a goal line clash, and it's just this, you're fighting and scrapping for every inch, and that was so much of who he was, and just pushed a lot of people in the building. And I think Ryan Day is just a different coach. And one of the things he did was when he took over, he put in a couch in his office, and he wanted players to come into his office and talk with him. So I think that seems to be one of the main differences between the two coaches from everybody I've talked to, and could compare notes a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely heard, just from reading about it last year, that there was a lot of changes around the Michigan game, where Urban Meyer may have been way more intense that week of Michigan than Ryan Day, but obviously we saw great results on the field, so can't fault him for that.
I mean, Ryan Day is still carrying on the tradition of they only refer to Michigan as the team up north. So
yeah.
that is alive and well, and it's written still everywhere in the building in the Woody Hayes complex, referring to them as the team up north, and they have a countdown clock. So a lot of the traditions they kept with that had started under Urban Meyer or Jim Tressel have been continuous under Ryan Day, because he was somebody who still came up in the program, even though he's his own man. I think still a lot of the same routines and rituals have been ongoing.
Yeah, definitely makes sense.
Yeah, speaking of that team up north, Joey, Jim Harbaugh in his tenure with Michigan is now 0-6 against the Buckeyes. If in fact they do play this season and Michigan loses to Ohio State once again, do you think Jim Harbaugh would be fired in that circumstance?
Not this year. I don't think a lot of coaches are ultimately going to get fired this year. I think 2020 for most programs, barring something off the field related where you would fire somebody for cause, I don't see how a lot of schools are going to be able to fire coaches just from a financial perspective. I mean, these are schools that are losing tens of millions of dollars due to COVID-19, either due to a loss of fundraising dollars from boosters to a loss of game day revenues due to ticket sales really don't exist if you are limited by social distancing measures at your home stadium, and all the other things that are associated with game days, concessions, merchandise sales, parking sales that go along with ticket sales. And they're losing all that money from that. Michigan, like a lot of schools across the country, are projecting massive losses of revenues and a deficit. So adding a buyout for a head coach on top of that, I think is going to make it a really challenging time for athletic directors to fire coaches, because if these are athletic directors who are speaking to their board of trustees this summer and projecting revenue losses this steep, and then they're going to go back in December or January and asking, hey, can you add $10 million to that because we fired the head coach? I think that's going to be a tough sell.
Yeah, I think so as well, and especially that Jim Harbaugh has consistently been able to generate winning seasons for Michigan still. They might not have the fancy 11 to 12 win season with, the New Year's Six bowl win or the signature playoff win, but I think it's a tough sell at this point for sure. I think you're absolutely right on that. And, for our final topic, I'd like to move on to a team with, believe it or not, a colder atmosphere than that team up north. My Minnesota Golden Gophers. I was actually born and raised in the Twin Cities, been a longtime Gophers fan, Ski-U-Mah, and they had a phenomenal season last year, defying all the expectations and beating a strong Auburn team and Penn State team to cap it off. What do you think at this point Minnesota can do to get on equal footing with the blue bloods of the Big Ten, like your Ohio States and Wisconsins?
I think they're going to need to recruit at a high level, and I think PJ Fleck has had the energy and enthusiasm to do that so far for the most part. I think you've seen them start to have maybe more of an influx of talent than they've normally had. So I think that's for one a starter. But I think ultimately, if they're going to challenge Wisconsin or Michigan or Ohio State, or just consistently come out of the Big Ten West, I think it's going to be being able to continue to recruit at a high level. And PJ Fleck, they got a big personality, and I think they need to continue to expand their recruiting profile. But it's tough because if you look at the Big Ten, I mean, go through the list every year in the 247 sports rankings, it's always Ohio State, and then it's Michigan, and then it's Penn State. And there haven't been a lot of teams that have really broken through and accumulated more talent than those teams. Even Wisconsin, which has been a consistent team in the Big Ten West, has been more of a developmental program. But I think that's maybe the key to challenging some of these top tier teams. If you can start to recruit better and bring in more talent, obviously I think it's where a lot of games are won and settled.
Yeah, hopefully we can get some of those great talents like Rashad Bateman and Tyler Johnson going forward. PJ Fleck is always a guy who's been able to find phenomenal diamonds in the rough and find phenomenal steals when it comes to recruiting. But I think you're right, Joey, in the sense that Minnesota is going to have to start going after and successfully recruiting some of these 4 or 5 star guys in order to get onto the same level as Wisconsin and Ohio State in the long term. Fun fact about them, Minnesota Golden Gophers actually have 7 NCAA titles, some glory days from the 40s and before that.
Yeah, I mean, early 20th century, they were able to piece together some big time seasons. But you're right about you mentioned Rashad Bateman. That was somebody they were able to get down from the South, down in Georgia. So I think that was you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think he had maybe the big time recruiting profile, but they were able to.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Certainly able to do a good job of scouting him and identifying talent and being persistent and making sure SEC school didn't find him.
Well, Joey, thank you so much for joining us here. I think it was a fantastic discussion about Ohio State, USC, and a little bit of Minnesota in their end. I want to thank you so much for your time in this interview. And where can the fans catch you?
Well, the best way to follow me, I guess, is on Twitter. I'm at Joey R. Kaufman, Kaufman. That's where I provide updates and tweet news to our website, which is the Columbus Dispatch, and our tab for all Ohio State coverage is at BuckeyeExtra.com. So that's the best way to find all our news and notes and coverage of Ohio State football. And hopefully sooner than later there'll be real live football for you to read about.
Yeah, and I will definitely leave those links on the description and within the description and the comments section of the video. We have Isaiah Young back here. Isaiah, thank you so much for getting Joey on the show. Any final thoughts from you?
Nah, man, no final thoughts. It was a phenomenal episode. Joey, thanks for coming on, man. Sorry for the technical difficulties early in the episode, but I'm glad that we powered through it.
Ain't no problem. That's happened to me before.
Hey, it's been a crazy year. We got to power through whatever challenges life throws at us. Ryan Day certainly isn't giving up, so we should just keep on trudging along and moving forward. And OH.
IO.
All right, so that'll do it for us, guys, at Quarantine Chats. I want to thank Joey for coming on the show and Isaiah for bringing him on as well. I want to thank Shree, Trevor, and Ryan, as usual, being fantastic co-hosts for me here. And that'll do it for us, guys. Happy Wednesday evening, happy hump day, and congratulations on the Celtics and the Raptors for going to a Game 7. That will be entertaining to watch. But that's going to do it for us, guys.